Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. Welcome to the Norwich City Council Audit Committee, 4th of October. If we turn ourselves to the agenda, item 1 on the agenda is apologies. Have you received any apologies?
Chair, we are forthright, thank you.
Thank you, so no apologies. Excellent. Item 2 on the agenda, public questions and petitions. Has the committee received any?
No, Chair.
No, excellent. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations? See no indications. So we'll move on to item 4, the minutes. These have been circulated ahead of the meeting. Is everyone in agreement with the minutes that they have received?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. That's unanimous. That's great. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the draft annual governance statement 21-22, page 11 on your agenda, and I'll hand over to Neville.
It's Leah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Sorry, Leah. Thank you.
It's absolutely fine, thank you, Chair. If the committee will forgive me in introducing this item, I'd probably just like to start by asking you to cast your minds back a couple of months to July. Because at the July meeting, I brought you the Code of Corporate Governance. And the Code of Corporate Governance is a document which outlines the overall governance arrangements that the Council has in place. So that's a reflection of the total picture. It benchmarks against the SIPFA framework, so it looks at what good practice is, it says what we have in place, and it identifies quite a number of actions that we feel will be good to take forward as areas for improvement for the Council. So if that's the overall code that you saw in July, this report before you today is an annual reflection of what we've done to strengthen our governance arrangements, but also recognising where there have been issues that arise in the year, and also risks to the delivery of our governance arrangements as well. Conscious, as we've just been talking about with the statement of accounts, this is a draft report at this stage. So it will come back before you at a later stage for final adoption once the external auditors have also had their chance to have their views and inspect the document and ensure they've got assurance that it has been compiled in the right, robust way. So obviously that will be coming back before you. What might be helpful at this stage is to identify particular themes you might have concerns about, areas where you'd like some further thought or narrative to. And I'm also just conscious today that our internet person has very kindly sent through some thoughts of his own in the past day or so. There are quite a few of those, so it might be that in this meeting some of those will involve looking in quite in detail about wording and how things are phrased. So these are all things that potentially what we can do is come out the meeting and take those away and have a look at those and look at how we can reposition and reframe those within the report to come back to you when you see the final version at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing the report, Leah. So just to pick it up there, the committee has in previous years recently looked at this and has made positive suggestions. We've made positive improvements, but equally we're very lucky to have David join us on the committee with his knowledge and experience, and I'm sure it will add a lot of value to the committee. Before I turn to David, I'm interested to seek views from members. And I think that Leah's suggestion of taking some of the elements that David has raised, and he kindly copied me into those elements, is a sound idea, particularly around wording, phrasing, and maybe dates and stuff. But I also think that there were about 8 or so questions in there that really would be of benefit to hear presented to the committee potentially, because that will also help frame the committee members' minds in his thinking of those potential issues. So if I could first just turn to members, and I'll take Councillor Wright first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I realise that what we're looking at in this document is something that reflects what's happened in the past, 21-22, but I couldn't help thinking when reading the forward from the leader and the chief executive, there's a bit in there talking about delivery of a balanced budget in 22-23 and continuing improvements. And whilst I realise we're supposed to look at this retrospectively, how much should we, in the back of our mind, be thinking about events from the last fortnight where the economic landscape for the country has changed quite dramatically? Thank you.
I think that's really interesting in light of an adjustment that was made to last year's annual governance statement to reflect some of the issues and challenges we face for housing compliance. because it is a reflection of the annual governance over the past year, but it was also expected that we identify where there are significant risks or concerns to delivering effective governance in the future. So I think in that mind, at the time of writing it, we added in about the cost of living crisis because that was starting to emerge in 21-22, and that does impact on our ability to deliver service, but also changes the way that we might want to deliver services to support people, and it's something we've obviously very strongly got to consider. So it could be entirely feasible to look to reframe that cost of living to be about the overall economic situation and the impact that has on the organisation and the residents of Norwich.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point raised by Councillor Wright, and it's good to see officers are listening. We have to respond. The market is moving fast, and effectively, yes, it all relates back to cost of living, but there is a lot of external factors that this council is exposed to outside of its control, and it's worth, you know, a horizon scanning for that as well. So I appreciate that. Turning back to members, Councillor Driver, followed by Councillor Haynes. Thank you.
Yeah, can you tell me how we're supposed to improve these reports when this young and even looked at them yet?
So it's before you in draft today for you to consider and provide thoughts on and see, and it might be that you're feeling that, you know, actually broadly we're happy with it, subject to looking at some areas, and therefore we could have effectively approved at this stage subject to those areas. But as I say, we've already thought back before you, Councillor Driver, Finance and Young have taken a formal look at it as for the statement of accounts.
But they didn't even look so last year's already. I mean, so there's something going. I mean, we're just going to get stuck in the mud here somewhere, and be a year behind and have to cancel the whole year and find out, oh, 1922-23 didn't exist. We went from 21 to 22 to 22 to 24. And it seems to me that if we keep going on with these young accountants, I mean, is there anything we can do about it? Well, except to give them a lot more money, I understand, coming up. They're doing nothing.
Thank you, Chair. We do get caught in this cycle because it links to the accounts as well, because the further you away from the 31st of March being the end of the financial year, we have to do a post-balance sheet review and obviously update it for anything new. And obviously, as Councillor Wright has identified, there are very big key economic issues that are going on that we need to put that context around it. In relation to the auditors, we have gone with the collective appointment of the auditors, and we have just received a notification from the PSAA that fundamentally they now have their auditors. I think there's 2 new auditors that are coming through, and it has come with a health warning that the fees are going to go up. But we haven't got the detail, it's just literally the first letter, I think. Councillor Price has received that as well. So we are aware that the process is continuing. At least we're in a position where we do have firms that are responding, because local government, you know, auditing is a technical issue, and therefore it's quite a tight market. But it does appear that they have managed to get 2 new firms involved in the process, and we just don't know yet who will be in our area.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good point, and we have expected fees to increase. There's been obviously an issue with that. It's been, you know, noted. This committee has made its comments on that, and any increase will cause a resource implication for the council, and we will address that. Is it a direct point on this, or is it a following point, Councillor?
It's a different
No problem. So we'll take Councillor Haynes followed by Councillor Kidman. Thank you.
I've sort of got a couple of different points, if that's okay, sort of say them all at once. And then, firstly is on points on members and their role, as it's outlined in here. I mean, just on the council inquiries thing, I know that some people have found the council inquiries process quite challenging in the way that it's worked. We've had issues with getting responses within time, and also my Civica has never worked properly despite taking it up with IT multiple times. So I take a slight issue with the word effectively in there. I wonder if that could be softened slightly to account that it does work some of the time, but other times I'm aware there's been lots of problems with council inquiries. It's not just myself that's experienced them, so I think it's worth flagging that up, that a different word might be trigger. I see nodding from other people who've had trouble with the council inquiries process. Also, just on training, again, members stuff on page 25, it briefly covers training. I think it's been requested before that the council induction training does cover audit training. So it might be worth incorporating that we know that there's more work to be done on sort of improving that induction training. I know, obviously, like I said, that was the year I came in again, there was challenges. We accept that very much. And one point that's different to the points on member development, if that's okay. Current and emerging issues, item 6, page 28, covers lots of really important things, but there's a couple of things it doesn't cover. One of those is climate change, which is now in the risk register. We've talked about it multiple times in this committee. There is a bit of an appetite to see that be reflected more in our risk, in the sort of emerging issues. And the other one is sort of instability, I guess. Again, we've talked about the war in Ukraine at Audit before, and how that may have an impact on our own judgment of risk. And I wondered if those two things ought to be addressed in the current and emerging issues section. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I think it's really worth pointing out that we've done a lot of work around training and supporting the committee over the last few years, and we're doing the self-assessment work, which again enhances the committee. I have advocated that we should have audit training for non-audit members, so that empowers ward councillors to be able to interact with the committee better. So I hope that we can get that on the programme soon. And I think the points that Councillor Haynes raises about sort of emerging risks around Ukraine and climate change, I think do merit a valid answer. So if I turn back to officers to respond to the points made, thank you.
I think it's a very interesting point how we look at climate change as part of this. I think you probably agree with me that it's probably not an emerging issue. It's very much a current one that we've known about for some time. So I wouldn't mind looking at the best way of integrating there, because it's possibly not in the current emergencies. What you're looking at something is a specific thing that's happened, whereas climate change is probably something that's more continuous and needs a longer term response to dealing with it. So I think it's how we maybe embed it into the main body of the report as well, so it's something we can reflect on. Global instability is a bit of a trickier one. It perhaps feeds into the economic issue that we've just been talking about a moment ago, and perhaps we can tie those two matters together.
I was just trying to tie up things that we talked about in audit previously that I didn't feel reflected.
Yeah.
Is why those two came to mind.
Yeah, and it's probably that we can look at tying that external economic stability with global instability as being a wider issue that we're trying to address. In terms of training, I think we're trying to get potentially a date for November is the last I've heard, which is going to look at sort of a wider package of looking a bit at the role of audit, potentially the role of scrutiny too, and how councillors, where it's appropriate to use complaints, where it's appropriate to be discussing things for audit, and fundamentally what those committees are doing, and specifically aimed at non-members, but of course members of the committees are very, very welcome to come along too and a demonstration of how they take value from being on these committees.
I really appreciate that response, Leah, so thank you for that. It shows that the Council is listening and adjusting. I would say about the emerging risks, climate change has certainly been on the agenda for 20 or 30 years, but never have we experienced the extreme heat ever in this country that we did this summer. And so those impacts of that risk are now emerging for the Council to deal with. But I look forward to that training programme at the latter part of the year. I think it'd be really beneficial for members. Turn over to Councillor Kidman. Councillor Kidman,
thank you. Page 15, the third bullet point down. I think it's a technical point about the process. When I was reading this through, I thought I'll try and pull out anything that I don't understand as a new member. So it's really with the creation of a senior leadership team of executive directors and heads of service to support collaboration on cross-cutting issues. The term cross-cutting is unfamiliar to me, so I just thought it would probably help me if I knew exactly what that bullet point meant. Thank you.
Yeah, so when we have our management structures, we tend to be themed around the services we deliver, but there will be things that impact across many different services. So Lou Rawson looks after community services, Graham regeneration, and myself is corporate and commercial. But when you're looking at cost of living, for example, that affects many different services right across the whole management team. And it's making sure that we get the appropriate people at the right meetings when we're trying to look at things that are broader, that affect the city, and make sure every service that is impacting on that outcome is involved in that discussion. So that's what we're referring to when we're talking about cross-service.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think the wider point is, although Councillor Kidman is new to Audit, she's representative of the general public, and I think there's a wider question about how accessible is the document to the general public, and some of the terminology that we may use throughout the document. And I think David has picked up some of those points as well, which I think are easily addressable outside of the meeting. So I think that it's a learning document. It's improving, and obviously Leah is very open to improving that document, and that's the right way forward. I'll look for members. Any other comments from members? And then I will turn to David. David, welcome. Thank you for your insightful looking at the AGS. I think it's really beneficial for the committee to have that input from yourself, because what you've got is you're looking at it as afresh, not as councillors that have maybe seen it in a few different versions over the last few years. So you can really you've really helped to identify some points where it may be difficult for members of the public to get the full benefit of the document, but you also raised a number of, I think, important governance-based questions. I was just wondering if you would like to sort of maybe highlight a couple of the key ones now in committee, so that officers can address it and members can be sort of aware of the process. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Can I say that before I start asking the question, one of the things that I've noticed in the covering report itself, it doesn't say how the annual government statement has been prepared, and I think that's really important, because the issue is that the annual government statement is supported by a SIPA framework, which is quite a detailed document, and in there it talks about how the annual government statement should be prepared, and that's not in the covering statement, and I think it's really important that we're all aware as to the process behind it and who's been involved.
And so on that point, Leah, how do you interpret that?
I think it's been something of an iterative process building on the work that we did to review the Code of Corporate Governance. I think we gave the Code of Corporate Governance quite an overhaul this year that really fed quite strongly into the preparation of the governance statement. So what we're doing as part of that process is going, okay, here is what SIPA says good governance should be looking like, and then using a working group of officers to say what are we doing in those spaces, what have we been doing this year, what do we know we need to be doing more of, and what we need to change. So all of that information is captured as part of the Code of Corporate Governance, but it was also there to be used as part of the annual governance statement too. So having got that information, I'm going to probably, it's not necessarily a confession, we've got a structure we've had in place for some time for preparing the annual governance statement. And so it's a case of taking that previous structure, going through and going, okay, let's look at how this has changed, using that same format, and then changing some sections quite significantly, other sections perhaps are more stable, and it's therefore updating it for the conditions this year. And I refer to in the report, actually next year might be the year to then do a bit of a piece of work to look at the underlying structure of this document. But at the moment it's a case of, okay, what do we know is check, what we know we've been doing over the past year, what we've got from the Code of Corporate Governance. That document was prepared and circulated to several officers and then taken to our corporate leadership team, who had the opportunity to review. It also then goes to the leader, given he's one of the potential signatories to the document from them, before it's then published on the website, as you're required to do alongside the statement of accounts, and is therefore open for any member of the public that does wish to comment, albeit it's probably not the document that attracts the highest degree of interest on our website.
Thank you for that response. So this point we've got a draft version, and there's a certain amount of time to make amendments. I think the suggestion that David has made about being open and transparent with the public about the process of review is a sound one. But equally, I understand there is resource issues with any work carried out. In principle, Leah, do you agree that the statement, the AGS, would be stronger for detailing that process, and would it be of how you go through the checks and balances of arriving at it, so that the public are aware, as David has raised, and if you are in agreement that that would enhance the document, what is the likeliness that you can incorporate that into this existing document?
Personally, I haven't previously put in how we prepare the statement into the statement itself. I'd normally include that as part of the cover report that comes before the committee, so that you're able to look at how this is done, and therefore whether or not you're satisfied that you can gain sufficient assurance from the process. Supplemented, of course, by the external audit review that's undertaken. I've not put the detail behind that in previous versions.
Yep, no, that's understandable, and I think the committee will appreciate that in the covering report. Obviously, that's not a part of the document which the end user, the residents, are going to be picking up. I think it sounds like a sound process to be evolving the document and including it. So I would endorse what David had said, and I ideally would like to see, if resources allow, that incorporated this year. I think at this point I'll take, unless members have a comment, to just take David, see if he has a response to that.
I think we've all got to remember this is a public-facing document. It's not being prepared for internal use, it's being prepared for the public at large. And I'm presuming the council doesn't prepare an annual report. I don't mean a financial report, I mean an annual report about its performance. That's a public-facing document. So this is in effect one of the few, I suppose, documents that the council is allowed to fly the flag and say just how well it's doing in particular areas. And on the back of that, I think it's really important that everybody knows how this document has been prepared and put together, and the fact that it's just not being, I don't know, say, an internal auditor sat in a room writing it without there being any discussion from management team or whatever. Again, the way that that's been explained, it's obviously gone through some assurance process. And again, I think that's important, not just for us, but for the public at large.
Thank you for those comments, David, and I wholeheartedly agree. Obviously, we are receiving assurance here, but how are the public getting that? But at that point, I think I'll take Councillor Driver, followed by Councillor Wright. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just a bit worried about this. I can understand the public might be interested or not, it's up to them, but it should be published somewhere. But if that should be online, or are you talking about all year they should be able to get into this report? Because there could be something wrong with this statement completely, and we wouldn't know for 2 or 3 months, but the public might know about it within a week. And then suddenly it all changed, and then they think it's a cover up and stuff. I mean, just in case you make a mistake, you don't know you made a mistake until someone finds it. So I'm just a bit worried about if there was a mistake and the public found it, then they have a go at the City Council, but then we realise that isn't a problem. And I mean, when would you put these accounts out to the public? We do it now, don't we, at the end of the year? But are you trying, David, having a running commentary all year going through, or every 6 months or something?
So I'll let Leah respond in a moment. I suppose what we're detailing with the annual governance statement, which is separate from the accounts, although they go at the same time, is that there is a process of assurance, checks and balances. Of course, there could be minor edits and mistakes, and those can obviously be rectified before publishing the final version. But any response?
Well, it was younger, but then probably a year.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a dedicated period of time when the council has to publish the statement of accounts, and alongside that, Annabelle has to make sure as Section 151 officer that the annual governance statement is also published with that document. So the public have a set period of time. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly. I think it's 40 days or something that they have they have to be able to review and specifically comment on these documents. And then those comments can potentially be looked at, incorporated, adjusted for before it then goes for external audit review. I think the documents do sit on our website for the past few years. I think if anyone did turn around and say, oh, you do realise you made a fundamental mistake there, which we're not afraid to do to us, then we will, of course, then take a look at that and see what action should be taken.
How many comments we had in the last few years?
I don't think we've had any on the AGS, have we? No. So that gives us good assurance that the public have the opportunity to engage and they find the document is satisfactory. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this raises to me a sort of interesting philosophical thing, I suppose, which is we're sitting here in this public meeting, the agenda of which is published online and kept for many years, the minutes of which are published online. We already hear that the agenda will include details of the methodology that goes behind producing the AGS, and we're now talking about whether we should be having that embedded in the AGS, but it is already there. So at what point is something considered to be in public? If all of those minutes containing that methodology are available online, does that not satisfy the fact that there is a level of transparency? And there are tools, I will add, not necessarily the council's website where search isn't that good, but there are other tools from big corporations that will crawl our website and make the searching of things quite easy. So I would suggest that we're probably meeting, from my perspective, the test of being very open and transparent, even with all of our drafts, which then get changed, and so we're showing our working, which I think is a good thing.
I think that's a fair and strong comment there, Councillor. And what I would say is that we've got to. This is a front-facing document which needs to provide a certain level of assurance that the council are meeting their governance functions. And if you are of a sceptical mind, you'll want to know that there is actually an assurance process happening at different points. I suppose somebody could go and find that, and if they work for a big business with an excellent web browser, they would do that or whatever. But for somebody who just wants to pick it up, I think as much clarity as we can provide, as much assurance we can provide, even if we're replicating information, which we do in so many different areas. The report will go to Cabinet, to Council, to Audit, the information is in triplicate. However, how do we interface with the customer, the resident, and are we doing that to their satisfaction?
But I think my point on that would be there is an opportunity cost in doing that in officer time. So we need to decide that as members, do we think it's appropriate to put additional resource into duplicating information that's already there to make it more readily accessible by members of the public? And that may absolutely be the right thing to do.
They're logging up City Hall.
We'll just take a second while that goes on. So everyone stay calm. I think the point you posed and the resource point you posed, Councillor Wright, is valid. So I would just like to take an indication from the committee. I'll let David in at this point. Thank you.
Can I just ask if I may respond to that issue? Is that this document should be posted on the website as a standalone document. The covering page, the covering report won't be prepared. So that issue that you've mentioned. Well, not myself is going to tell me something different, but that issue that you mentioned won't be there. So if you remember the public, you just come and read the AGS, you don't get the covering report. So the issue about how it's been prepared is not there. It's just presented to you as a document. And because the other thing about it is the AGS really should be sharp and focused on strategic things. The word in the CIFA document is brief. And I don't think at 37 pages anybody could say this document is brief, and it certainly doesn't, I don't think.
What I would like to do is, I know that we have got a long meeting, it's a heavy agenda, and we've started late due to having to reorganise the meeting. I would like to suggest this to the committee, that we take a couple of points from David now, so that members can consider it. What I would like to propose is that I set up an online dialogue between myself, David, Leah, any other members of the committee who are interested, so that we can speak between now and the final statement and start a process of identifying some of those points that David has raised, talk about the validity of their inclusion and whether or not they are included this year or in following years. So does that sound acceptable to members? I'm looking round. I'm seeing that sounds acceptable. Councillor Driver would like to come in, followed by Leah.
I just don't know what the other points are yet. No one's brought up. We discussed it. It would look like one member of this committee is suddenly bring up 6 or 7 points, and there's going to be a subcommittee looking at this and deciding and bring that forward and stuff. Why are we here?
I'm quite happy to do the next hour and 25 minutes of the points that David has raised, but I suspect that we will not complete the agenda of the meeting tonight. However, David's input and insight coming into the committee with the fresh eyes is positive and welcoming, and I would like to investigate that to its fullest to help enhance the AGS and the committee. However, I don't feel that we have the time and space capacity to do that tonight. So the suggestion is either we do it all now, and that's an extra hour on the meeting, or we look to do this offline. So how do you feel about that, Councillor?
I'd love to do it here now. It's been an hour and a half here.
I'll take the points from officers. Yeah, Leah from the...
I think it perhaps may reassure Councillor Driver that actually, as I said earlier, this is a draft document. So if we do go away and work on points, that ultimately then comes back to the committee again for its approval. It's not that we'd be trying to do that and agree it as a subcommittee without any further input from members. So I'm conscious some of these points are quite detailed and we'd be taking over specific words in there and their inclusion, whereas I'm conscious there's other things that the committee might want to focus on, so it might be helpful if we do that work today. But we can, of course, then circulate it to all members for further comment before it comes back to the committee. Just on the point around the length of the annual governance statement, I don't disagree. This is a very long document. It's longer than I'm used to seeing. I have dropped a quite substantial hint in the covering report. We did quite a lot of work on the Code of Corporate Governance, and it would have been quite onerous to restructure this document as well. I've put it's ahead of production 22-23, which is the next year. It's intended to assess whether there are opportunities to simplify the document and make it more succinct to aid its production and understanding.
I really appreciate what you're saying there, and it shows that we can do more work on this next year, and with David's input, be it between the draft and the final publication. That's only going to help improve that process that Leah wants to embark upon next year. I'll take Annabelle at this point, followed by Councillor Stootley. Just Annabelle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the point around process and understanding, because I'd be very happy, and it would only be the covering report though, because I don't think it's a requirement to put it in the AGS. So as a one-off, do an overview for the committee so you do understand the full structure and approach and all the different checkpoints that the process goes through, so you can get that assurance as to how it's worked. We can put a reference on the website if I want to reflect on this in relation to which audit committee approved the AGS, and therefore they can go and read the covering report, which would provide more information. But I'm very happy to work with David. I did say to him we probably wouldn't be able to answer all his questions by tonight, but happy to have a separate conversation around anything that he could see best practice elsewhere, because we are a learning organisation and we do welcome that feedback, but we do need to put it in the context of making sure we're getting the right value out of the time we're spending.
No, absolutely. I'll let Councillor in just a second. I think that's a very logical way of tackling that particular point that's raised, and I think that the committee seemed to endorse that. There was no objection to taking that forward. I'll take Councillor Stootley's point, and then I'll come back. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to suggest that the exercise does go ahead offline outside of this meeting, but the members are kept in the loop that the suggestions from David are forwarded to members immediately, and that all changes are fully tracked so that we can see what direction is going in, please.
Well, absolutely. I think David was very kind to spend a lot of time researching this, posing questions and sharing those thoughts with me last night, and I appreciate that. And any points that David has raised in his notes are only that those are points for discussion, and I completely agree that everybody needs to be aware of what is being posed, because the committee may not share David's perspective on the adjustments. So if it's okay with Leah and with yourself, David, if we could speak offline, get a consensus of the points that David has raised, and then put that to the committee and give the committee an opportunity to view his comments. And then if there is any major objections from members, we can then decide whether or not we want Leah to respond to those or not. So is that agreement that we can sort of do some work away from here? David, happy to do that? Yeah, please.
Can I say, Chairman, I'm quite happy for my comments to be circulated to the rest of the members, so everybody can see just the comments that were
absolutely
being made.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's a case of you've sent them to me as an individual member, it's just as the chair, and I think it was a courtesy, and I appreciate that. So I'm sure officers who have already received the notations will forward them on in due course for members to look at, and then we can get better work in our AGS across this draft and over the development next year, which Leah is obviously looking to do. So I think at this point, with no other observations from members, is that it is recommended, it is recommended that the Audit Committee approves the draft governance statement 21-22, and I think we need to add to that recommendation, subject to the conversations offline. Yeah. And so are we in agreement, committee? I see nods, so I appreciate that, and I will close that item and move on to the next item, which is the draft statement of accounts, and this time it will be Neville to introduce it. Thank you, Neville.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to sort of start off by saying a thank you to Jean Stevenson and Robert Mays, who were instrumental in putting the accounts together. It's a 140-page document, it takes a lot of effort. Jean is with us until this Friday. Actually, she leaves us this Friday to go into pastures new. Robert is the new substantive member of staff who will be doing this going forward, and obviously he's been with us since around April-May time, I believe, and so we'll be certainly taking us through the audit for 21-22. And then completing the 22-23 accounts. So Robert, unfortunately, is not very well, otherwise he would be here tonight. But yeah, just I'd like to give thanks to them.
Could I just at that point, I'm sure that the committee would like to put their thanks on record for both Jean and Mark. Robert, sorry. I can't wait to meet Robert in person and his brother Michael. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So in terms of the item itself, just to reiterate that these are the unaudited accounts for 21-22. The audit will commence in December 2022, we believe. That's the timetable, and we've been talking to the auditors, and we believe that is still their intention to carry out the audit during that period. The accounts were produced to the deadline, through the public consultation process, and there were no objections or questions raised via that process. The accounts themselves covers both the general fund, the housing revenue account, the group account and the collection fund, and the accounts represent the outturn position for 21-22 on the general fund, which is an underspend of £2.3 million, and on the HRA, an underspend of £8 million. The full accounts will be audited by Ernst & Young. We are engaged with them already. They're doing their pre-audit work, and we've sent them the working papers in order for them to choose samples. So I like to think that we're going to be in a good position when they do start in December to get through them quite quickly. It's a process that should take between a month and 6 weeks. So that gives you an indication. But as far as I'm concerned, all of the questions and pre-work that they've asked us to do has been completed, and we're in a good place. So we've looked at the annual governance statement. It goes alongside the accounts, and so that will continue to evolve as we've just had the discussion between now and the final signing of the accounts, which will be undertaken by this committee sometime shortly after the audit concludes. So thank you very much. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you for introducing the report, Neville, and I hope that we are still the same committee by the time we get to sign them off, and we are actually at the mercy of the external audit market. It's a weighty document, but it's a very important document that the council put out because it shows how we are running as a business and how we are using public finances and looking after our citizens. I'm aware that we have a fairly large agenda and that we will be returning to this to finally sign off. Normally, the practice that we've operated here is that we do spend a lot of time deliberating at this draft point. Today's recommendation is to just note that the statement of accounts have been online since the date of the 28th of July. So, with that in mind, I would like to take pressing questions from councillors on the draft statement of accounts, with the knowledge that there is another opportunity to question, particularly after the audit has been completed by the external auditors. So I'm looking to members, and I will take Councillor Driver, followed by Councillor Sands. Thank you.
I haven't got anything to say on the accounts at all, except we need to go through it and change certain words, like on page 41, it'll say Her Majesty's, and that should be His Majesty now and stuff like that. That's the only thing I can find.
Yeah. Well, arguably when it was published, it was Her Majesty, so I think that's probably in keeping. Was it? The next one will have the King on, I guess. I think that's probably correct. Councillor Sands.
I was just looking at the investment properties, which is page 66 of the report, page 117 of the papers. Those are in thousands, so 21,787,000. That seems to me to be an extraordinarily large figure. So is 4,711, which is thousands, which I was just surprised at the size of those figures.
Okay.
So yes, that's the 4 million. Sorry,
4.7 million. Yes, and 21.7 million in 21-22 was the prior year there. So, yeah. So the biggest change there is you'll see the 15.6 million. Which is a gain from fair value adjustments, which is to do with the revaluation of investment properties. So you can get pretty major swings going on in that line item.
And also the statement is in the authority has no contractual obligations to develop investment property or repairs, maintenance or enhancement. I mean, my experience in the past with assisting people with leases and things is the leaseholder is often responsible for repairs and things. So aren't we responsible for the maintenance of the stuff we buy and invest in? Seems a bit odd to me, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, we can check it. I mean, there are various sort of lease conditions, as you say, but quite often with investment properties, there are obligations on the tenant as well. But we'll check what that. I think perhaps might be referring to tenant style responsibilities, but we'll just double check if that's the case.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. This question is not pressing at all, but I just wanted looking through this, and there was I was looking at the section on page 163, or which is 1112 of the statement that relates to HRA council dwellings. And I noticed that in the last financial year there was a higher number of right to buy sales than in the previous financial year. Do we have any sense as an authority yet how that's going to be looking in this current financial year? And do we think that the change to the interest rates is likely to have an impact to drive down those right to buy sales?
I don't know, I've got no evidence to support it, but I suspect that's very likely. That there certainly would be a short-term blip. Mortgage products have come off the market, and so I would imagine that would be the case. I don't have anything empirically to back that up, but okay. I think you're right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that point. Councillor Sands.
Yeah, just following up on the right to buy scenario, where if tenants have exercised the right to buy, and with the current situation which has changed so radically just in the past week or so, if those tenants suddenly find themselves unable to maintain a mortgage which they took out, would we buy those properties back, or would they end up being lost to the private sector, which then ends up then going back on the market at colossal rents? And when I say colossal rents, I know that there are ex-authority houses in my ward which are over £3,000 a month rent, and that we're talking about a little middle of terrace.
It is possible for the authority to repurchase right to buy properties, particularly using right to buy receipts, and it is a strategy line that's there if people want to go down that route. So it's absolutely possible. Yeah, but it's clearly done in the past.
It's just I had a situation some years ago where someone had bought a house on the right to buy, changing circumstances. They lost the house because it was taken back by the mortgage holder. They ended up sofa surfing and then wanting to put their names back on the housing register. So we end up with a double whammy in that we've got more people on the waiting list and a dwindling stock.
Yeah, entirely possible.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the points. So I'll just do a little brief summary. I think we'll have time to reflect on this, and we can raise questions at the close of the accounts. I think the narrative report is strong, and it explains the situation that the council finds itself in. It talks about the financial risks, and it's good to see that those financial risks are managed with the risk register, and it mentions how the council are managing and mitigating those, and that will lead on to the next item we have. We can see, and also explained earlier in our briefing, that we've had capital underspend and housing revenue account underspend, and that also is reflective of the extreme circumstances the council found itself under in that financial year with the COVID pandemic. And that also that currently that we have in our accounts that grants money, like town grants money, so we have money which is there, which we have earmarked to spend and use. So I think what we can see is that there's an issue about medium-term financial security for this council, and that's reflective of all councils at the moment. I think the officers are trying to work with the constraints that they have. They've identified the risks ahead. I think the accounts are a fair and true reflection of the work that the council have done. The figures seem to equate correctly from an accounting perspective, and I'm sure that our external auditors will, when they complete their work, be able to flag up any issues or concerns that they have about our account, which we can then review at the next meeting. So if there are no other comments, I will duly note the report, and the account went on the 28th of July, and we'll move on to the next item, and that is not there, which is the agenda. Okay. Lovely, and we're going on to 7, which is the risk management update, and I'll hand over to officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jez. This is myself again. Twice a year, this committee receives the summary risk register, risk review report. Normally that takes place after Cabinet have seen the report. For the slightly unusual circumstances we found ourselves this year with the death of the Queen. That didn't happen. It was scheduled to go on the 14th of September, and that meeting, although it took place, only considered items that needed to take urgent decisions, and so it's been deferred. And so I can't feed back to you any particular points from the Cabinet, but nonetheless, it's here for the Audit Committee to review. And I think the key points really are that we've added 4 new risks, and just to re-emphasise, this is the corporate risk register, so not the full risk register. There are a large number of other risks managed at a directorate level, but these represent the corporate risks, which are significant risks to the council, and therefore get considered by the corporate leadership team as well as at a directorate level. So the new risks that have been added are risks 18 to 21. They're around nutrient neutrality, around housing regulation, the cost of living crisis and climate change. And within the report you'll see there's a summary table setting out the current, what's known as the current residual risk score. That's where officers believe that the risk stands at the moment, compared with the target risk score, which essentially is the risk appetite that the council is content to accept. And so obviously where there's a divergence between the two, the greater the divergence, the more mitigations need to be put in place. We have changed the reporting format of the risk register, so I'm hoping you're finding the new look and feel of it better than the previous stuff. It's certainly a lot easier to produce this report and consolidate the information. That said, there are still a bit rough around the edges, some comments in there that have been taken out the old format and haven't gone very well into this. So if you bear with us, this is the Q1 position at the end of June. People continue to update it on a very regular basis. So I think the other thing to note is there is an exempt appendix to this report with 2 risks which are not for public publication, and so we'll happy to take questions on those in the closed part of the agenda. But apart from that, happy to take any comments on the risks as they stand.
Thank you for introducing it. I'm sure the appetite of this committee is high for risk, so I'm sure we'll talk about it. I just want to comment on the layout, particularly the summary. Nice and very easy to use, so I really appreciate officers doing that for us. We have had a conversation from the previous meeting about looking at the other risk registers at the management level. It was felt that there would be a lot of information to bring to this committee. We can see our agenda is quite full already, and so if members have any comments about the remit of this committee accessing or discussing those management level risks, then feel free to address that with myself in an offline capacity. But turning to the item, I will take Councillor Wright first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Looking at risk 1, obviously this is now 16 and prepared on the 1st of August. We're obviously hearing noises about likely reduction in government funding and departmental cuts, etc. With hindsight, is that risk now looking quite optimistic? And would you think that the sort of residual risk score there would likely now be higher when this is next re-evaluated?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. We are fundamentally reviewing this all the time. We've had a discussion with CLT colleagues around the sensitivity of what we prepared back in July. Obviously, we did a deep dive into the financial situation, and at the moment, just because the lack of clarity from government in relation to the future, because we did actually take some sensitivity analysis within that overall position, we feel that we've probably got enough at the moment to hold firm on the financial position we're at. But that doesn't mean we're standing still. So CLT Thursday are fundamentally going to go away and have a whole session around the current economic position, whether what's been happening in the last few weeks needs to change the direction of travel, and that's an ongoing iterative process. But just to give members assurance, we are taking that time out to do that, and obviously then that would feed in through to the risk score that we've got here.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'll take Councillor Haynes, followed by Councillor Sands, followed by Councillor Dry. Thank you.
On the ASB coming out of this register, I know that you said you felt that the mitigations being put in place about that were significant enough that they're likely to bring down the risk to the acceptable level over time. I wondered if that's a good policy to follow broadly, rather than making it about this particular issue, which I think, ASB identity is still a major issue, but it's more about the general policy of risk and whether we should actually take things out of the risk register until they've been at an acceptable level for perhaps 6 months. Maybe that's my attitude to risk, but I'd personally like to see it having been in a couple of times at the acceptable level, and that's when we decide as a committee, yes, okay, we're comfortable with this coming out of the risk register, rather than it coming out before it's hit that and possibly having to bounce back in at a later date. I think it looks better for the council if we're running it in that slightly more risk-averse way, admittedly.
Should we take them one at a time?
Sorry.
I think that's a really good point. Obviously, public risk register is the property of CLT, and that they decide what stays on and what stays off. But I guess the question that Councillor Haynes might be asking there is what's the rationale of removing and that kind of belt and braces of keeping it on? I think it's a valid point. So thank you.
If you don't mind, Chair, I'll go first, and I'm sure Neville can give some more supporting information. But fundamentally, it doesn't disappear, Councillor Haynes, to give you that assurance. So we have different levels of risk registers. This is the corporate risk register that we share publicly. But each DMT, which is Directorate Management Teams, has their own Directorate Risk Register. And what this is happening with this one, it comes off the corporate and it goes to that directorate. So it will still be monitored. But fundamentally, we believe we've got to the stage where we've embedded the mitigations to have the current residual risk position, and therefore we take it out of the arena of a discussion, because we want to ensure that we're talking about strategic risks that are relevant and live at that point in time. But to give you that assurance, it doesn't disappear. If it's felt by the service, it still is a live risk. Fundamentally, it will sit on the departmental risk register, and that's when it may come back if that environment changes.
No, I think that is good assurance, and obviously what you've got to be looking at is looking for those emerging risks, and you can't have all the risks on the corporate risk register. It would dilute the document and not make it perform its function, I assume. Did you feel that answered your point there, Councillor Haynes?
Yes, I had picked up from the report that it has gone with the departmental risk register. I think it's more just about, how long we keep them on there for. I personally would like to see them stay on for longer, but I accept that it's not our document. We can't make that decision.
I know that Councillor Sands would like to come in. Did you have a couple more?
I have a further point on the
risk register.
Risk register, yeah.
Sure. Okay. If we take the second point, then I'll let Councillor Sands in, and if we have any more, we'll come back. Okay.
It was just on the climate change one. There's quite a few things that are down as red there. I accept that's probably because this is a new risk, that we're still working out quite how we're going to get everything together on that one. So I do accept that it's likely lots of stuff will come in red on the new ones. But there are 5 of those mitigations in red. So I just want to know if we had any potential deadlines in mind for when they might come, at least up to amber, if not green.
Please.
In the new format that we're looking at. Oh, sorry. Oh, I apologise. Go on, sorry.
Thank you for joining us, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies that I couldn't join sooner and I hadn't flagged that to colleagues. Thank you for the question, Councillor Hayes. Yes, it's a new risk, a good example of us doing just what Annabelle had talked about, that spotting those new things coming through and that they need to be flagged at this level. You're right, we haven't quite worked through all of these yet. Quite a significant amount of work has been done following the kind of the point at which this risk was drafted and was added to the register. So I think when we bring it back next time, you will see some kind of milestone dates and key deadline dates in there that you'll be able to monitor against.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it was a good point about where those mitigations, where those risks lay, and just, you know, as a council with an interest in this particular area, it's very welcoming to see that positive work from all councillors around the issue of climate change at this council has helped inform that process, so that the council can be really as proactive as it can possibly be on such a wide and varied issue that impacts us as an organisation. Councillor Sands, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A few things. I'll get through them as quickly as I can. On page, page 196, it talks about the failure to address spectral England advice on nutrient neutrality. I mean, how far are we along the road to this? What exactly is being done? And how has this been affected by water companies all over the country, including Anglia Water here, discharging raw effluent into rivers and seas? And do you want to respond to that first before I go on to the other items?
Shall we take it one at a time? Can someone turn the mic on? Thank you. Let's take them one at a time. Whether or not officers here in that capacity can answer the nutrient neutrality, I'll look for. But ultimately, I do think there is a process, and that we have had some engagement with planning, and I've received some updates. I think it is a challenge. Are there any comments? I think that having it where it is on the risk register and identifying those problems from an audit perspective, we should be satisfied that is happening in due course. And I think that's more of an inquiry to the service area. But are there any comments from officers?
No, if you don't mind, Chair, we'll take that away. But I do know Sarah, who's obviously the head of service responsible for planning, is preparing a member briefing around this, so there have been regular updates, and we'll ensure that you do get to see that.
Okay, on page 200, where it talks about the council funding medium to long term, I know you said you felt we were holding our own there, but I've got a series of concerns here. 5, in fact. The 5th one is possibly more distant and less threatening at the moment, but the effects of inflation, the effects of cost of living crisis, the effects of energy costs, even on just on running City Hall or another things, and also the effects of government cuts. And then looming down the track somewhere, we have county council and their threat to impose a county unitary, which will affect things. I think part of their motivation for that is to get rid of district councils and pool the reserves that they can take a big chunk out of their 60 million black hole that they announced yesterday.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you raise a very pertinent point. I obviously accompany yourself to the county council, and I do hope that the Labour Group will support my motion on county deals to offer a referendum final vote to the people of Norfolk on any such deal, and it's not made by a small group of Conservative cabinet members. You know, there is a existential risk to the district councils, I feel, on this, so I hope that Labour will support that. The worsening of this risk is clear to see. There are mitigations in place, but I think the councillor's point about these external impacts, how can the council get assurance that we are doing the best we can on these particular issues, is there, do we reach a point where litigation just simply can't protect us from the impacts, I guess?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Sands. So our senior leadership team are constantly reviewing this position. We take themes, I mentioned cost of living crisis, of which Lou's team are leading on for us, but pulling that cross-service input to. And every time we come across an issue where we've got more data and we can see the trend, what it means to the people of the city, we're feeding that into our financial position. So I know we report publicly to you on our finances every quarter, but give you assurance, we take a report and the next report going to CLT tomorrow every single month. So we're considering all of these issues. Within there, we're reassessing what our financial risks are. So we look at the risk register, we look at those risks, and we try and evaluate what those risks could mean to us financially, and we feed that through. We had the principle previously of creating a risk reserve a couple of budgets ago, just because of all of this uncertainty, and it's just getting harder. I don't think I would have sat here 3 weeks ago thinking we'd be where we are today, but we just need to respond to that. I can't tell you at the moment whether we can cover off any new issues that we're not aware of, but we are in a very good position where the management team have worked really hard over the summer to come up with proposals to address the gap that we're currently forecasting, but we all know, we just don't know what we don't know. And fundamentally, we're taking members through that process, and we will continue to do that until we get to February. But as I stand today, with what I do know, without what I don't know, we are in a position where we should be taking you through to be in a sustainable position, even if I can't 100% balance the MTFS, which we'd originally hoped, but we will be in a position where we'll be able to balance the budget for next year.
In just a second, I'm going to let in the portfolio holder, and I welcome his comments. I think one piece of assurance that we can take is how dynamic Annabelle and her team have been in addressing the emerging impacts of the financial situation, in being able to confidently predict, being able to put a balanced budget together. So we're showing good work under pressure, and if it's possible for us to deliver in these circumstances, this council, I'm confident with the officers we have, they will be able to do that for us if it is possible to do so. So would you like to come back? Sorry, Councillor Kendrick. Just Councillor Sands. Is that one more? Is that a new point?
Well, relating to this.
Sure, and then we'll take Councillor Kendrick and then Councillor Driver.
Would we, obviously in this current climate, we're going to have a lot of tenants who are going to have trouble paying their rent. What are we putting in place to assist them, perhaps to defer rent or whatever? I mean, there has to be some sort of strategy if they're in trouble. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yes, Leah, thank you.
I was just thinking that Councillor Sands might be interested that the scrutiny committee are looking at forthcoming debt review. I think that's going to take place at a meeting in November now, so hopefully that'll be a very interesting piece of work for members.
Mm-hmm. When is that?
Scrutiny meeting in November, Councillor?
I don't have the date off the top of my head,
but I think the points you're picking up there, if you feed through to your scrutiny members as well, and then they can take those kind of your audit perspective forward, I think that's good working. I'd like to take in the portfolio holder. Thank you, Councillor Kendrick.
Yes, I was actually, you actually said what I was going to say. I think I have great confidence in the office to try and deal with this matter, and I think that they are working very hard. Obviously, it is a very difficult situation. Literally, it's trying to shoot the moving target every moment of the day. Just on a lighter point, I used to say I try and reduce the risk to this council every time we go canvassing the Lincoln, but that's by the way. Can I just ask you, but can I just ask a point of clarification, because this hasn't come before the Cabinet yet, and this one, number 16, is to do with the implementation of the Elections Act. Obviously, that is also involved in the requirement for photographic identification. On the updated progress, due to the lack of, as it states here, due to the lack of clarity currently available on the roles and expectations on local authorities, we cannot develop the implementation scheme. It's now expected this information will be forthcoming in September and October. Given that we are now in October, has any information come? Because I wasn't aware of it.
I think that's a very good question. As your shadow, I received the briefing on this last week, and as far as I was aware, there was no information as of yet. But I think Leah can confirm if there's been any further movement.
We've now been told we should get some movement on Friday. So fingers crossed that we were told we'd be getting some movement in September, and that wasn't so forthcoming. What we are talking about now is in that vacuum, what can we do? Because we cannot sort of rest and pretend that this won't happen. Absolutely, that's not something we can do. But what can we plan for? What can we mitigate? What do we know about it? Is a shifting target, but it might mean that we have to do some upfront work to anticipate what we might be required to do. Of course, trying to run a general election or a referendum in the middle of that might increase our risk profile somewhat.
I think that's a fair point, and I'm sure that all political parties on this council want to see, you know, the opportunity of self-determination from all voters, and I think cases of fraud, when it's been audited in that respect, have always been very low. I think the system is not really broken. I can only suspect that the national government are trying to do is to disenfranchise people, and that is detrimentally negative. Thank you for the point, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, I've got 3 points, and I want to just go on to pages 203, 204 and 206. I just want to know who actually set these scores in the first place and how you actually work all this out, because I keep asking for that and no one's ever told me. Well, they do tell me up to the point where I don't understand it. Why are we looking at the target risk in the current risk? Why is the target risk set at that? And why are we looking at a better target than what you've got on here, just like on further waves of COVID? Norwich is the worst place in Britain at the moment to get COVID. I mean, the rate here, the impact is 12. I think the likelihood should have been 4, so it should have been 16. Target, I think that we should be trying to get the target down to 2s. But are we just going for 3s and have let go for and let some of our citizens die?
Should we take that point?
Well,
it
worked out to the next one on Brexit, which is the same kind of thing, and the impacts going on. You know, flood season, September, October, staffing issues because we can't get staff here. And the expectation, the target risk, is still likelihood is 4 on the impact, it's only 2. Where the other way around is 4 and 3. So, and just on one more, whatever one I said, there was another one on there. But anyway, I was just wondering why, also, they're the only ones not on track. All the rest, and all the things you suggest, on track, and you come to those 3, and there's nothing there to say what the hell's happened at the moment.
I think there's a lot of good points in that. I think it's really important to just, since public meetings, get on record. You know, as a group leader at county, I do receive updates from public health. We are not disproportionately impacted by COVID in any way in this area, and there are all the lessons learned in the past by public health are there and on standby if there is an escalation. And we need to go into a different way of handling COVID than the current policy is. But I suppose that your point there, you're saying, is that there's those mitigations there. You kind of want to know how are they using, what framework are they using to determine the score, and why they're setting a certain number as the target score, and how those mitigations achieve that for you?
Yes, but also we are the worst place in the country. I think you've been listening to those stories in the country too long. And I think they need to do more work in the deprived areas in the city, and what they're actually doing in the city instead of just outside. And the imminence rate is really low, so we should be careful.
It's something that myself and Brian and Steve Morphew, leader of the Labour Group County, have raised, and I'm sure that Councillor Morphew can give you a briefing about that particular issue. So just turning back to officers, about how you're calculating, the methodology of that calculation.
Yeah, sure. So on page 199, you've got the risk scoring matrix, which sets out the sort of how the things interact, and sitting behind that, you've got a number of metrics, if you like. So the impact, there's a financial metric that describes whether it's high, very high, you know, whether the impact is. There's a sort of a subjective judgment about whether it's likely to impact on negative publicity for the council. So there's a number of subjective and some objective measures that sit behind the impact, and again on likelihood there's some very broad guidance, because of course the risks are very different and will have different factors feeding into that. So officers, and again on each risk you'll see there's a risk owner. So every risk has a risk owner attributable to it, and a number of people within that service who will be helping to manage that risk. But the risk owner will take that judgment about where the residual risk is, and there'll be discussion at directorate management teams and corporate leadership teams about where the target risk should be, taking into account those metrics and parameters. So it's got a bit of sort of pseudoscience associated with it, but given that the risks are very different, it's not precise. There is an element of judgment involved, the logic is that where your residual risk is above your target risk, you put in place mitigations, and you understand very clearly that a mitigation is like pulling a lever. So if you pull that lever, whatever that particular mitigation is, what would you expect to happen to either the impact or the likelihood score, and that's how it moves.
And why are we aiming higher?
Sorry.
Why are we aiming higher?
Or to get the score further down. Why arriving at that? Would that be because you're looking at those parameters, those impacts, and perhaps a lower score would be impossible, unachievable?
Yeah. You can't eliminate risk completely. The target risk is at the level where the risk appetite of the council says we're okay with that risk, and so you aim to bring it down to the target risk, and that takes into account, A, the level of risk you're prepared to accept, and B, the actual.
Where can we actually find out the list? What tell us what the risk is, what we think is good?
Well,
surely
that
risk
table there, where you've got the kind of green, amber, red. We want to get everything into that green effectively, if that's achievable with the parameters and constraints. And then the council should be in a comfortable position if it's sitting in green. However, that may not be achievable with certain parameters, but that's what you're aiming for, aren't you, to be in the green. But I think let Annabelle in at that point, and then I'm going to take a point from David. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Fundamentally, as a leadership team, we have to get a position where we're comfortable with the risk appetite. And fundamentally, that target score is showing where the management team believe that risk appetite is appropriate. And there is, lots of things that feed into that. It's not just about financial, but fundamentally there will be a capacity, whether it's resources or, a pound sign that determines how far you can move that risk. But the executive function of the council is to consider this as part of the assurance report. This goes through to cabinet on a quarterly basis, and fundamentally there's another opportunity there for members to say, actually, I'm not comfortable with that target. Would you review it? What would the impact of that be if we wanted to take it beyond where we're currently targeting it? And I think it's important, again, and it came out as a good point as part of the audit training last night, was here we're looking at the how, and it's about for you here to get that assurance that actually this is the position we're at. The target is, I'm looking at the COVID, we're targeting to 9, that you're looking for that assurance that we are working towards that, we are dealing with the mitigations and fundamentally doing the reporting and updates as required.
Which is my second question about why ain't there nothing in the progress thing? Why ain't it on track?
Is that because it's a new entry?
Well, no, there's 2 or 3. I mean, if you're saying that everything is okay, and this is just to make sure everything's working properly, why ain't there nothing in that box?
I'm sorry, Councillor Driver, which page are you?
Yeah.
Well,
so
206, there's nothing there.
Page 206, so it's on the
204, there's nothing on that one.
Increase or decrease.
This one is how on track.
Yeah. So if we could make sure that that's populated properly before it goes to cabinet, so that detail is included, I think sensible.
That was a new box that was included this time. So
That's 3 out of 5.
Yeah. So some people have populated it, some people haven't populated it.
Oh, I see what you mean by that.
It needs to be done.
Yeah, no, good. So that can be picked up, and that's good. And I assume that through the Labour group, Councillor Kendrick is probably your point of contact when you're thinking about, do these risk scores reflect your appetite as a group or as an individual councillor? You can have that conversation with Councillor Kendrick, and then he can kind of represent that at cabinet. David, I think it's a good opportunity for you there.
Yes, thank you. It's just picking up a couple of points that have been made in the responses. That's one of the issues, of course, is the target risk score. Again, I'd ask the question, is that in effect at the level where the Cabinet's risk appetite is for these risks?
Yeah, please. It's
Yeah,
a good question.
yes, broadly, it's a decision by the corporate leadership team and directorate leadership teams, informed by discussions, and review by cabinet for these. But yes, essentially that's it.
Okay, and if I can then, in that case, is the risk appetite, the Cabinet's risk appetite defined in the risk management policy?
Can't answer that categorically. There was a lot of work done actually quite early on when I joined the council about speaking to the corporate leadership team about their risk appetite and recording it. I can't actually say hand on heart whether it is or Faye can.
I can help with that query because I was involved.
Thank you.
We reviewed the policy and we did recommend that the risk appetite of the council is tied into the scoring system. So I think if you have the policy sitting here in front of you, you'll be able to see the impact scale, the risk appetite that the councillor is content with within that scale as well. So it gives a little bit more context to the scoring. I understand you review the policy on a regular basis, but circulating a copy just to remind people may be helpful for the next time it's presented.
I think that's a great idea, and obviously David is new to the committee, so I'm sure he will benefit from that. David, did you want to come back on any of that? Thank you.
I do, yes please. That's quite an interesting response. Of course, the risks on the corporate risk register are very, very wide. So you've got things from like health and safety in the workplace, where apparently we're accepting a risk of 8, which when you look on this box, the box on page 199, you get 8 as a likely or low impact, or you get 8 as an unlikely event but a high impact. And I always think when you look at health and safety risks, the issue for the council or any organisation should be, would we accept the death of anybody? And if that answer is yes, then in effect I go back and say, well, I think your risk appetite's wrong. Which brings on to another point. If you want to lower risk appetite, generally you've got the two issues, impact and likelihood. And the issue is that if you've got the death of someone, that's going to be the same impact no matter what the likelihood is. So if you only have a death once every 100 years, you might say it's going to be a very rare likelihood. But if you have a death every 6 months, it's going to be very likely. So you can have a different score. You can have 25, or you can end up with a score of 5. So my question is, if you want to reduce a score, you've generally got to reduce the likelihood and not the impact. Because the impact generally remains the same. If you look at all these, impact of COVID, the impact of cyber security data, it's the same, so it's a likelihood. But to reduce likelihood, you've got to either put more resource in to reduce that likelihood from A to B. And if you put resource in, there's a cost to it. So my question really is that, whilst this is interesting, and the sheets behind it are very interesting comments, I think that from a governance point of view, one of the questions we should be asking is, what's the cost going to be to reduce the impact from its current residual to its target residual score? And in effect, a cabinet happy to accept that, because I think that's a discussion that needs to be had. The audit committee needs to be aware of that. When they're aware of this, because cabinet are happy to accept the target risk score, then in effect, or even the residual risk score, rather than target risk score, if they're happy to accept that, then that's something that we need to be aware of when we're discussing other items across the year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point raised, and obviously the risk score, whether or not it's the likeliness or the impact, is of the ownership and domain of the cabinet and CLT. Councillor Kendrick is welcome to answer as a member of the cabinet if he chooses to on that key point about reducing the likeliness, because as David says, if the impact happens, the impact is the same. If it's every 6 months or once in 100 years. And I think framing it in that extreme sense of, say, a loss of a member of staff or a member of the public is an extreme scenario to paint, but it is a real scenario we should, have in our minds as custodians of the city. But I'll invite Councillor Kendrick and then invite officers to respond.
I've been involved in this kind of philosophical argument. This kind of philosophical argument about question of impact versus effective impact versus its probability many times before. I think what I accept what you're saying is that obviously it's less easy to deal with reducing the actual impact of the event. On the other hand, you can actually do some things to actually mitigate it. I mean, for example, I appreciate it's very unlikely, but if the meteor was to hit City Hall, the impact would be very, literally, would be very, very severe indeed. But we have backup plans and backup venues where we could run services from. So I'm not entirely in agreement with you. There's nothing, well, there's little we can do. I think we should always have backup plans for even when the worst happens. Now, I appreciate the death of a worker is a slightly a different topic, and obviously that would be tragic, and obviously that would be something that we would be very concerned about. But yes, I think there are times when we can also reduce the impact of an event, not just its likelihood.
I appreciate that response. I will take officers' points, and if David wants to come back with a final observation of things we've had, I'll allow that as well. But then we will look to start to close this item. So, Annabelle.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. As I described earlier, there are assessments around the risks that we're looking at here and our need to drive forward the mitigations. So looking at our overall financial resourcing, we're always considering any decision we've taken and positive approach we're going to take to whether it's mitigating a risk or delivering an outcome for the individuals of the city. Fundamentally, that financial assessment is continually happening. And I mentioned earlier that we've created a risk reserve. Fundamentally, that's putting a financial assessment around the impact of one of these risks actually coming to fruition, whether that be around delivery of savings options for the budget, or whether it is a physical risk here and what the impact could be. And that reserve is there and exists. We also have what we now call a business change reserve, which fundamentally would help with some of these mitigations if any service felt that they hadn't got the appropriate resources within their ongoing budget to be able to address this, and if they needed some one-off support, that positive decision to create that reserve and one-off funding was there so that we can address these issues. Because previously we had an investor save reserve, which is all about therefore you assume there's a return, but sometimes you just need to invest and spend some money to actually improve an outcome, and risk mitigation is a good example of that. And those options are continuously available to people to address this.
Thank you for that response. Teasing out from this, I think a good point that David has raised there is that I would like to suggest that the committee revisit the risk appetite of the council through discussion ahead of future meetings and help us to discuss that. And I can see that officers are keen to do that with me, so that we can understand the risk appetite of the council and of the cabinet and of CLT and how we view that as an audit committee. I think that's a very good point. So we'll bring that up afterwards. David, did you have anything that you wanted to come back on the points you've heard? No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any other points? I'm aware of time is against us. Any other points on the risk management update? No? Okay, so we will close that item. We have been providing updates. It's recommended that the committee notes the risk management report duly noted. So we'll close item 7 and move over to item 8, which is the internal audit progress update. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report covers two things really: internal audit plan progress and follow up on that standard internal audit recommendation. So if we take the first item around progress, I think today's meeting we've had a considerable amount of discussion about risks that are bubbling up and new issues, and I think actually it makes sense almost halfway through the year to consider the plan that was originally approved in March 22 and make considerations about whether what we had originally planned is still going to provide the assurances that the audit committee require and that the CLT requires. So we've done an initial horizon scan on some of the things, and you need to appreciate obviously this report is a little behind some of the events that have happened more recently. But we've done an initial horizon scan on some of those areas where we aren't currently providing assurance in the plan, but we may wish to consider those, and they're at section 2.1. Before we head into a discussion with CLT about how we review the plan and add in or defer any items going forward into quarter 3 and quarter 4 of this year, I thought I would give a list there of the kind of areas that we're considering and whether you feel that we should add any of those to the discussion, whether I think obviously there's good discussion happened today about some of the other areas, so we can definitely take those forward. At section 3 we talk about the progress in delivering the plan, and section 4 talks about the outcomes arising from our work, and that's the gradings that we give to each of the pieces of work that are concluded. At 4.3, we talk about operational effectiveness matters as well, which is good practice points. So that section just gives you an overview of the way that we grade the findings and the overall reports. At 4.4, we talk about the reports that we've been able to finalise for this period, and as you can see, we're a little behind schedule for quarter 1. I'm pleased to report that we have now issued 2 in draft, with leasehold management now being issued as well. So we need to get management responses for those, and then we'll bring the final reports back to the committee for discussion. At section 5, I give a little bit of an update regarding the internal audit work that still remains outstanding from 21 and 22. Environmental services and capital accounting and programme management are still going through the management review process. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to provide you with the findings at the next meeting. They are on track for that. And the remaining item, IT governance, is actually provided at Appendix 2. So that's the last of the 3 from 21-22. At that point, I think it would be beneficial to ask the committee for any queries that they have about progress, and then we can move on to follow-up, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing the report. Members, what do we think? I've got Councillor Driver followed by Councillor Wright, I think. No, okay, just Councillor Driver at this stage, thank you.
Yeah, I just got a couple. I saw one on here about training for us. And that was postponed, and we actually had it last night. I actually thought that was one of the best training sessions I've been to. I thought that was excellent. But I was just wondering, in the wording in here, and I can't find it at the moment, let's say for members elected onto the committee. And I think that we should have that open to all members, because the committee changes every 12 months. People leave the council because we have elections every single year, which is a bit different to 4-year elections where people may be on the committee for the whole 4 years and stuff like that. So I think we do need to train other councillors to get them up to speed, just in case they come onto the committee in May or in June, whenever it'll be. So we are up and running again, instead of going through all this, oh, I'm a new member and they're a bit behind and felt left out on it, and other people have been here for years, keep opening their mouths like me. So we're really got to be a bit careful about how we go into that training, and I think that should be done for a lot of other committees as well. And the only other one I had was, Ian will probably tell me about this, on page 249, licensing, and fees and charges across the service recommended September, October. Is that doing any day, any week?
Well, thank you for the points. I think pick up on the training. We've improved training.
Yep,
I think opening up audit training for all members is definitely the way forward, and then we'll get that initial bit of understanding for members so that they feel confident in interacting with the committee and subsequently maybe coming onto the committee. And I'm sure that new members have benefited from some of the training we've had, and although we do have a few older stages like ourselves, Keith, you know, having a myriad of people at different levels of experience, I think is also can be beneficial for the committee. I'll give Councillor Stootley an opportunity if he wants to answer the point directly about fees and charges. Isn't it something that's coming to scrutiny as well, or have I got that wrong? But Councillor Stootley, if you wish to.
Yes, thank you. I can't give a detailed update on regulatory services, but I have a briefing later in the week, so we're about a week behind on that. So there will be some detail. But if I can just respond to the point that Councillor Driver made. I certainly agree with more training, and apologies I couldn't make last night's training, but certainly I'll look at any others that come up, and I think we should have them every day after the election cycle. If we had a 4-year cycle like other councils do, there is always an opportunity, always a possibility and a risk that you could have a completely new council. So there is benefits to the cycle that we have. Absolutely, and that might not necessarily be a bad thing. Councillor
Thank you. Just picking up on Faye's point about section 2 and the sort of suggestion for new things. Having looked at these, I think I can definitely personally see a benefit in safeguarding and financial viability, but take on board the last paragraph or the last sentence in the neutrality about how that maybe doesn't necessarily work as a standalone piece, but no, I'm supportive definitely of safeguarding financial viability.
Thank you. Any other members' comments at this point? David has indicated, so I'll let David in at this point. Thank you, David.
Yeah, if I can, again, I think the issue about future audits, so to make a note here that a couple have already marked off. I think something that would be useful for us to obtain assurance about would be the implementation of a new, I'm going to get this wrong, probably Unit 4 ERP, Finance and HR systems, because that was stated on the audit plan. I think that would be useful. And again, coming back to cost of living crisis and everything around that, I think something around supply chain disruption would be quite interesting. Councils, key suppliers, we might be able to continue, but are they able to continue and provide services to us, and how much we rely on those? Following on from Councillor Sand's question about the account side, what about commercialisation? What the lease has said about increasing rents at this time, responsibility for riders in running costs, but of course the answer we got is maybe that we're not responsible for those, but doing those, I think that's probably quite interesting, knowing how much the council relies on commercial income. And then the other one, was just about, again, talking about cost of living, the fact about management employees, and should I say, temptation to commit fraud against the cost of living crisis. I know there's a piece of work on the audit plan around fraud and corruption, but I don't know what that's done. It's probably more about policies, I presume, but I don't know. So, but again, that's just something that came to mind. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Councillor Kendrick will be so disappointed that he's out of the room when you mentioned commercialisation and how that has been supporting the council, because he would very proudly tell you that it has actually had a significantly important aspect in delivering services in the recent time. However, the risk that you point out is valid, and the fact that we have those commercial risks in volatility of the market is also the other side of that coin. But I think at that point I'll let officers respond to the points you've raised directly.
Thank you, and I'm very appreciative of those points. I think there's something that I can definitely take forward for discussion. And if not standalone pieces of work, we can certainly incorporate some assurance in existing audits that we've got now. So thank you very much, David.
If I may, Chair, as sponsor for the ERP solution that's going in, fundamentally, for me, internal audit becomes part of that assurance before we take any go-live decision. In the audit plan, there is an element around key controls and assurance, and that's fundamentally where we'll be talking to Faye about picking up that piece of work, because I'm a real believer that we want proactive auditing. We don't want to be reactive, and fundamentally that's where we need to get that assurance pre-go live. and it's something that we've done previously and we'll be looking to do it again, as Julia has for some of our other projects. So we'll fundamentally be working with Kay to make sure we do that proactively.
I'll just look for any other points from the committee. I'm not seeing that. We normally would spend a little more time going through the report. I think the report is good and clear. It shows the progress to date. Obviously, there are concerns about the delivery and the fact that we haven't got as much coverage. I mean, that is a continuing problem. I would ask you if there is, in your opinion, have we been able to close that gap between what we would like to deliver and what we will be able to deliver? Obviously, we've already revised it back. Are we on course to deliver what we're looking to deliver, Faye?
Thank you for that question. Yes, certainly. So the plan you've got in Appendix 1, we're still absolutely on track to deliver that by year end. Notwithstanding the point that we may wish to change things around slightly and add in risks. This is a risk-based plan, so we need to make sure that we're providing assurance over very key risks, and I wouldn't want to provide a report on an item that is a lesser risk when we've got more pressing concerns at the time. So it is under constant review, but I'm still confident and remain confident that at year end we will be able to have enough assurance for me to conclude on an annual opinion, and we will certainly make sure throughout the year that happens. So.
Thank you, and I'm sure that you'll be flagging to myself as Chair of Audit and CLT, etc., if we are feeling that you're not going to be able to get that coverage. And I think conversely, after having a year where we are not looking as deeply as we want to, I think the committee would like to see a commitment and an assurance that actually what you would have envisaged doing for the next cycle is going to be exceeded, so that we can catch up on some of that stuff that we've missed in this year. Because I don't think what we should be doing is postponing stuff, incorporating it into the next plan, which is effectively pushing something off of the plan. So I think the committee would be expecting to see an increase in coverage next year. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think when we look at the plan, we need to move away from the number of days delivered. And what I need to do as part of the planning process is demonstrate to you that all of the key risks have coverage in year. So that when you're looking at what's being delivered in Q3 and Q4 ahead, that's going to be the real issues that you need assurance on at the time. I totally appreciate that, we always want more assurance, and it's certainly helpful, but we've now got a 3-year programme to make sure that we are picking up on all of these points on a cyclical basis. But it's very much my view that in year we need to focus on the most significant risks and not concern ourselves with stuff that isn't as high up there.
Yes, no, I agree, and I think the 3-year programme is a good way of being able to plan it out long term. Obviously, that's an agreement between yourselves and CLT. That's not our domain to decide that. What I would say is if we are perpetually just covering the coverage of the key things, then we are missing other things. So I still believe that we should have greater coverage next year to compensate for the lower amount of coverage this year. That's a viewpoint that I hold, and I hope that CLT and internal audit listen to that and consider that moving forward. I think at that point we will draw this particular item to a close. We thank Faye for producing the report, and again, Faye is available to ourselves, through myself or directly, if you do have queries about the quarterly reports, and she'll be happy to answer. Due to the amount of time that we've spent, and I appreciate commitment of the committee, we've had the work programme circulated. I would have liked to spend a bit more time discussing the work programme, but unless there are any issues or objections from members, I would like to agree that we proceed with what's set out in the report. So are there any points about the work programme that members wish to raise? So can I accept that as standing? That's excellent. Councillor Sands.
I was just going to say, just on the training committee, consider if we were all which we'd already spoken about earlier.
No.
That's part of
I appreciate it. Absolutely good point, and we will keep building a robust training programme. So with that item coming to the close, that is the end of the public part of